Welcome to our 145 session, Stories and Humanity in a Digital Age. We have 4 presentations. If we're to have any discussion time at all, please be mindful, about 15 minutes. About 15 minutes is going to do it, please. I'm Cindy Carlson, I'm chair of the English department here at Metro. Karen Mahler has kindly invited me to share this session. I'm very honored to do so. And after this, I run off to something much less elevated, to getting students registered for freshman composition. So this is going to be a lovely part of my day. We're going to take speakers in order. We'll hold questions until the end of this, until everybody has spoken. So up first, Maria Polski from East-West University, Lawrence Gorman, also from East-West University, and then we'll gamely carry on with Ismael Biyashev from DePaul with How Does Folk Wisdom Work in the Digital Age?
In the meantime, Ismael was accepted in the doctoral program at UIC, so it's now Ismael Biyashev of USC. We will try to skip through a lot of material because we only have 15 minutes. The jump start for our research was the system designed by Yuri Rozdestensky. For those who have been following our papers and presentations, it's going to be a quick refresher. He was the chair of linguistics department at Moscow Lomonosov University, and we didn't divide, my dissertation director, we didn't divide culture, language, and linguistics. It's all one department. And on the other side of the Iron Curtain, he was developing the same things that media ecology was developing here, how each new medium adds and changes the previous media. So when we added electronic media, then TV changed, then printed text changed, and even oral text changed. Next. And among other things, he also talked about the changes in morality with the changes in media. So about 150,000 years ago, depending on how you count, Homo sapiens spoke and created tribal morality, where if a stranger comes in your territory, he's probably after your women and food supply, so what do you need to do with a stranger?
Kill him.
And eat him, exactly. With the creation of canonical text, we developed the great religions where the murder of a non-stranger becomes just as bad as a murder of a stranger. Of course, professional morality provides exemptions. For example, if you're a soldier, thou shalt not kill becomes an exemption. Printing press creates national level of morality where sometimes people from the same family are pitted against each other, and then when they're fighting for the flag on different sides. And then digital technology makes us all a global village, and Rozdestensky argues that we don't surpass this, but all of these things coexist in the same person. And if you look into your hearts, you may notice that, well, some of us are highly evolved, but most of us still have these tribal reactions, the gut reactions first, and then the evolved parts of our brain can somehow overcome that. Proverbs were formed on the tribal level, so we presume they reflect the tribal level of morality. And if we accept that Rozdestensky's premise is true and tribal level of morality hasn't disappeared, then old proverbs still should speak to what we are. If Rozdestensky worked through a corpus of proverbs of different peoples of the world and identified that they actually show a communication theory. And he described that folk communication theory. Rule number 1, first think, then speak. A lot of proverbs illustrate that. I like this one. A prudent man keeps his knowledge to himself, but the heart of fools blurts out folly. Next rule of conversation, first first talk and then act. Talk things through. Measure 7 times before you cut once. Another rule of conversation: words are binding. It takes me usually a long time to explain this to students, but a word said is like a tree cut. You can't take it back, that's it, it's gone. One of very useful rules: one good word is better than 1,000 scolding ones. A tongue will not fall off if it says a few nice words. And what happens when we break these conversation rules? Strife appears. A quarrelsome wife is like a constant dripping on a rainy day. Restraining her is like restraining the wind or grasping oil with a hand. Don't break conversational rules. And now font will be getting smaller and smaller because I need to talk faster and faster. Radistinsky listed 14 steps that a listener should follow before the listener actually accepts what is said. Separate the interest of the speaker from the meaning of the statement. Some people kiss the baby but mean the nurse. The lips of an adulteress drip honey. And it's kind of linked to the need to identify the speaker's agenda. The fox knows 100 tales, all of them about chicken. So, and this is a rough translation of the Russian proverb: people talk about whatever a spinster talks about a husband. So identify the speaker's agenda. And the list goes on, but in summary, the listener is required to reflect before accepting what is being told. Remember, this is the folk oral stage of communication. Next. Rules for the speaker. There are 13 different ones. And they also prescribe responsibility. And they prescribe taking time. First cook your words, then take them out of your mouth. My mouth is my shield. You need to determine whether your statements will harm a third person. For example, nothing is known in the house yet, but everyone outside already knows. Heaven is silent, people talk for it. That's what, how gossip and how rumors spread. And overall, all those rules are summed up by: if you're afraid to speak, don't say anything. If you have said something, don't be afraid. Back to the rule that the word said is like a tree cut. And you will notice that this applies only on the condition that people around you will stay with you. Because if they are strangers in the night that will pass away from your life, then you don't need to care. Folk society presumes that we're dealing with people on a regular basis and maybe for the rest of our lives. Next, please. Now I'm Ismael, who combed through a list of dictionaries and online sources for folk sayings, and I selected sayings about strangers. Et voila! The stranger is for the wolf. This is what folk tradition, oral culture, tribal morality tells us. If you save a stranger from the sea, he will become your enemy. Be wary of strangers if they come for your supplies, for your women, for your food, or for your jobs in the case of tribal people in the modern world. It's better to be beaten by your own man than kissed by a stranger. So I hope you're all beginning to think how this applies in the global village where we encounter strangers all the time. And we're supposed to be positively disposed towards them. But 150,000 years of our DNA tells us this. Neighbors. This actually comes from a dictionary of American proverbs. which by definition is already times of print. But if we look at the content, it looks like people coming up with these proverbs were still at the tribal level of morality. A good neighbor is a man who smiles at you over the back fence but doesn't climb it. Love your neighbor but leave his wife alone. Our neighbor's ground yields better corn than ours. You know the grass is always greener. Love thy neighbor, yet fool not down your hedge. You must ask your neighbor if you will live in peace. These seem a little threatening, because they warn that the neighbor can really ruin your life. So tribal morality based on the content of Proverbs shows that we need to be wary of neighbors and that we should destroy strangers. Next one. So now that we are in the global community, multiple choice, are we going to treat people in this global environment as members of our community? People that will be around us and we're responsible for what we say, so we need to think through what we say? Are we going to treat them as strangers who are coming to get our jobs and to challenge our traditions? Are we going to treat them as transient passers-by? You know, the real-life equivalent of getting drunk in a bar and telling your troubles to a total stranger and then hoping you'll never see this person again, which can happen online? Or is the correct answer D? We don't presume to have an answer. We're trying to diagnose the modern condition. So let's move on to the next slide.
Okay.
Dr. Gorman.
Okay. Okay. Now, before I say anything else about morality, I want to notice something about the form of Proverbs. And that is that Proverbs do two things. Number one, they tend to be literary. By that I mean, or should I say memorable. You pay attention to the language, an oral society, but you pay attention to the language. And you pay attention to the language precisely because you want it to be memorable. The second thing is that the purpose of a proverb is to close off. It's not to elicit thinking. We listened to a talk this morning on aphorisms, and the point of an aphorism is to spark thinking, is to open up, is to go beyond, whereas the point of the proverb is just to stop it. Stay with the proverb. And to, okay, now, national society is not proverb-based. Decisions are made on the basis of law, not proverb. And that, as a matter of fact, the rules I learn in a modern society are rules that have been determined not by me, my group with whom I identify with. Because think of the fact that Proverbs originate in societies that probably have 70, 80 people. So, as Maria said, the people I'm with, I'm going to be with for an awful long time. On the other hand, the laws are legislated by legislators that are filled with people that don't know each other, they know each other, they do the legislating, who are voted by constituents with different interests, and they're kind of fought out. Okay. Now, what's really interesting is in the contemporary world, we have something that could look like proverbs, but actually are really more like aphorisms, although usually fairly lame ones. And that is kind of Twitter speak or Facebook speak. And notice that the rules for Twitter speech is compression, which is also the rule for a proverb. So that, as a matter of fact, we are more. I hear people attack Twitter and the effects of Twitter because it gets you to reduce and everything like that. But you can think of that as kind of a literary form. And people trying to express things in a very limited way. But on the other hand, I think there's something else that's very interesting happening in the culture. And it's happening in the culture today as opposed to when I was a kid. And that is that if you look at Facebook, I look at Facebook occasionally, and you see what young people post, an awful lot of young people emphasize their weirdness. I mean, and very often you get these very cryptic comments that are simultaneously oracular and provincial. In other words, they are meant to be understood by my friends and not understood by people not in the know. But I present them as if they have a kind of oracular function. On the other hand, they have short post lives, because I'm going to put another thing on this, very soon. And for a lot of young people, there's a constant flow of my thoughts in forms, and very often it's extremely uncensored. Okay, now the point of young people today, I think, is to be original, to be yourself. And it's very hard to be yourself. I'm going to use my son as an example of these things because he's the one I know the best, and everything like that. And, he thinks of himself as kind of artistic, although he's a librarian. In terms of people we live in Chicago, the people who go to Columbia College or the School of the Art Institute, he generally considers as posers. But on the other hand, he's kind of a poser himself, because it's extremely difficult to get out of posing, because you're on display, and it's funny because I watch him and I say, it's not you. Well, who am I to say? Now, the premium is not on conformity, because if I'm a conformist, I'm likely to be a poser. But on the other hand, it's very hard to be original. So therefore, you get the kind of weirdness that you frequently get from, and again, I'm not using this in a judgmental term, because that's a matter of fact with my son. And I love people. I actually like many people who are like this. They're in a difficult situation, although they're no worse than we were. Okay. The tribal world reinforces community, and if you look at almost every single proverb that Maria gave, it is a proverb that reinforces community and pushes out outsiders. Now, it's interesting what happened, and this is actually part of the debate I had yesterday, or behind it. If you look at the 1950s, and I find this really fascinating. Familial stability, love and marriage go together like a horse and carriage and everything like that. Leave it to Beaver. I mean, there was a constant character formation made by the media in the 1950s. At the same time, the divorce rates were going up. Then you got the 1960s. We were from the I was from the 1960s, and so I'm a little. When I remember what I was like back then, I'm a little bit forgiving of young people too, because we weren't all a whole lot better. We were just different. Okay, now the digital world is about the coalescing, the dissolving of transient communities. I think that this is. I'm going to put it in this way. My son has 500, close to 600 Facebook friends. Now you can ask yourself, what is friendship when I've got 600 friends? But you know, but there's a sharing and everything like that. Relationships are provisional. I mean, and again, when I was a child, I could imagine many horrible things happening. There was one horrible thing I could never imagine: my parents divorcing. That was not going to happen. I mean, you know, I mean, that was stable. I mean, you know, my wife and I didn't divorce either. But I don't think my son could have that kind of assurance, because almost everyone. Okay. Okay. The last thing I'm going to say about this is, we have the comment about the culture wars. That because there are people who are trying to keep traditional values, they find themselves at war with the new world. And so you see the things you find in the Islamic world, you see things that you find in the United States, you see things you find in Israel, you see things you find in India. You know, and it's very much produced by the loss of identity of the modern world. Okay, thank you.
And now, Barry Liss from the University of Wisconsin will talk about poetry as a medium of articulating media ecological themes.
I've got a couple handouts. So, I guess I printed like 20, but I think that should be more than enough.
Well, I'm going to minimize.
That's okay. You know, I like it. It's the only light that I'm going to stand in. So, you know, a couple of years ago I started writing poetry, and it's very much influenced by the media.
Should we share one sheet or two?
I'm sorry?
So it's on the one sheet?
There's two sheets. I mean, like one, I don't know, there's two handouts. One is the, you know, one is the prose, just like 5 quotes, and the other series of poems. Does everybody have it?
We have the prose.
You have the prose? And you know, just for like the next 10 minutes, I'd like to read the poems. So coming up to the conference, I read Havelock's preface to Plato and Arms, Orality, and Literacy, and Oh, What a Blow That Phantom Gave Me by Edmund Carpenter. And Havelock really had a profound influence on how I think. And you know, I had just come off a couple of years with the classics. And so, I mean, I found your presentation really fascinating. And I was also the one regarding the maxims, right. I guess, in this transition between the oral and the literate. I really think, you know, I've got to keep my appointment with Milton Perry, is that the guy's name, who was the main influence on Havelock. And the idea of, so Havelock's preface to Plato articulates Plato's argument why poets should be banished from the Republic. And the notion of the poet in oral times radically distinct from what we think of poetry, right? And so Havelock's terminology of the kind of communal encyclopedia, and you know, you think about postman's amusing yourself to death. The poet, the bard, the minstrel in the oral world would put the audience who knew what was coming next, right? Who often very much knew the chant, or you know, if you want to call it a poem, into a kind of orgiastic frame of mind. The kind of, you know, the amusement, the sort of radical arousal from hearing the word, you know, what we would turn to drugs, you know, the media, music. I think probably music is, you know, the rapture we would get from our favorite classical piece, as well as, you know, when you think of your favorite song, how you want to listen to it over and over and over again until, you know, if you don't memorize it, you've certainly internalized it. And so for the last, you know, it's really changed my trajectory about how I think. And I would make the argument that we really want to turn back in many ways to the oral world. We really do. And I think many of you saw, I guess, Dr. Gallagher, the auditor of the city of Denver, just a wonderful example of a kind of return to that oral noetic. And so really, in many ways, the content of what he said was subservient or subordinate to the way he said it. And he closed with a song. And so if it's all right with you, I'll read a couple poems and see where they go. This first one is called The Noetic Shift. Dr. Postman, have you heard? The noetic shift just occurred. People have no wish to read. In gray, shallow fields they roam. On Philistine kitch they feed. A toxic stew forms the loam. Bloats and coats cannot surmise the moral path of the wise. Ineptitude's rather odd effect. Beauty claims so little respect. Moloch's madness gains in traction for minds bound without abstraction. Democracy festers grim and sterile. Legality grows brute and feral. Prison, war, disease, and famine, pious while adoring mammon. So, a rather simple poem, like a lot of media ecology stuff, especially Postman stuff. And Mumford as well. This, the apocalyptic is always in the background. And I really, when I reread this, I kind of see the influence. Mumford talks extensively about Moloch and Mammon, that kind of stuff. So, in my, I'm trying to coin a term, this idea of the bloats. And so the bloats come up repeatedly in my poems, and I guess a lot of my writing is expiatory. I kind of think of university administrators as the bloats. So this next poem is called Bloats and Dandies, and it's kind of bouncing off of the Stoic notion of what? The voluptuary, and how that's greatly enervating, and the notion that our sensorium can be titillated in so many ways is greatly weakening to the spirit and the soul. So, all right, bloats and dandies. Bloats and dandies, dandies and bloats, luxurious fripperies guzzle down throats. Sedentary minds, flabby and pallid, all but the senses void and invalid. Anger, envy, and fear for malaise. Affronts to the ordinary garner high praise. Bloats and dandies, dandies and bloats, voluptuary covetous, insolence promotes. That's not bad. Here's a poem very much influenced by Louis Mumford, and his line talking about the decay of Rome is covetousness and insolence are stigmata of decay. All right, those are really cynical, those are really nasty. I've got more hopeful stuff. Do I have time for one more?
Yes.
Do I have time for two more?
Yes, I
All right, maybe three more before you throw something at me.
I'm pretty anal about the watch, don't know.
So this poem, I'd like to go to number 5. This is poem number 5. I passed out these poems. I could see you want to not follow along, but if anybody... Here, why don't you? So this one, the notion of a kind of poem marking an occasion and evoking emotion, and so this one, number 5, is called "The Professor Retires," and we'll see if you can relate to it, and we'll see if you have an emotion when I read it. I'd encourage you to read along. And incidentally, like McDougall called me up and he wanted to use this for his professor's retirement, and he narrated it into a microphone, and in the end he cried. So you give him a hard time. Robert McDougall, your fellow media ecologist. All right, the professor retires. With a love of the good and a demeanor quite kind, his eloquent wit sparked fire in the mind. A scholar's grasp built on keen authenticity, he forged opaque thoughts into lucid simplicity. To me, he personified wisdom's stability, his words a balm of soothing tranquility. Dearest professor, how the decades have wandered, never untouched, from the ideas we pondered. His days of teaching now all but finished, yet the seeds of his passion grow undiminished, and students of yesterday embrace their beauty to communicate love of truth and beauty. All right, not bad. You know, a nice poem.
I think he can be forgiven for crying.
Yeah. And if I could read just like two more, and this would be 9 and 10, and this has to do with climate change. And there's this guy, and I talked about him in class. His name's Baerresen, and he's a near-term extinction theorist. And he's kind of left the dialogue of, we got to do this, or else it's going to go bad, or you better recycle, or he's pretty much, we're screwed, we're going to die, get used to it. And it very much, like if you go look at his stuff, right, it's highly provocative. Right, he was a professor at the University of Arizona, very, very well decorated, and while editing a book about climate change, he just came to the realization that we're not going to do anything. So these next two, this first one, it speaks to this idea of dragon's breath, which is the methane, CH4. Which a lot of people think is even more sinister than the CO2. So, dragon's breath, number 9. Methane chasms in Siberia spew without germane hysteria. The river of the dragon's breath augurs of our coming death. Some pause in hope, maybe perhaps they'll skirt societal collapse. The id denies the future woe built on the ego's status quo. Nadir of the human arc, civilized life going dark. To frame it rather quite succinct, the math equals we go extinct. All we love is doomed to fade at 6 degrees centigrade. Laws of physics find us trapped, lacking will to adapt. Time to change all but past, Mother Nature's batting last. And his blog is called Mother Nature Bats Last. And so he published this for me on his blog. Again, you see the kind of ecological themes there, a rather depressing poem. Let me read one more. It's called Feedback Loop, and then I'll close on a happy note if I can. Do I have time for that? Well, then I'm going to forget this one. And so, these are original poems. I'd rather, one way to kind of reflect on this orality literacy divide is to go really hard back at the classics. And if you take orality seriously, that means memorization once again. Moving away from prose and attempting to become that cultural encyclopedia. For me, it's guys like Auden, Yeats, Wadsworth, and this is Wadsworth Longfellow from a young man's heart response to the Psalms. Just 3 stanzas, and now I'll be done. And it's one way to think about McLuhan and these other great scholars, as well as yourselves, I might add. Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing, leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. Footprints that perhaps another, sailing over life's solemn main, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother, seeing shall take heart again. Let us then be up and doing, with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. Thank you very much.
Next we'll have Nancy Parish at Duquesne University, Abolishing Humanity in the Kaleidoscope of Media and Community.
Thank you. I have no PowerPoint. I did not write any awesome poetry, but I did do a close read of C.S. Lewis. I'm pretty much going to read my paper to you, a portion of it, because I want to stay in time and I want to actually get what's important out of C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man and bring that out to you. There's a lot of themes in here that I'm seeing in various panels about natural law. So that's kind of where I'm drawing upon and discussing at least 2 implications to media ecology. C.S. Lewis once said, "The moral law isn't any one instinct or any set of instincts. It's actually something which makes a kind of tune, the tune we call goodness or right of conduct, by directing the instincts. Human beings possess an innate understanding of what is right and what is wrong. This understanding is actually known as natural law. Thomas Aquinas, Aristotle, bringing it back from that. And it actually is written on the heart of every man, and that's Aquinas' quote. One of the best defenders of natural law tradition is C.S. Lewis. Lewis actually penned Abolition of Man in an attempt to salvage Western civilization from the rejection of natural law tradition. He saw education systems teach such rejection of natural law and actually believed that the society that accepts such a teaching was doomed. And we can kind of see that right now going on in our education system as well. Lewis argues in The Abolition of Man that instead of teaching literature, the Green Book teaches that emotions are contrary to reason and that hence contemptible. Instead of teaching that there is a truth and a good as well as there is a falsehood and an evil, the Green Book actually teaches subjectivism, emotivism, relativism, positivism. Lewis believes that an education in moral subjectivism would eventually destroy the society that accepts it. The rejection of the Tao or natural law tradition will eventually lead to man's conquest of nature or the dehumanization of man. Technical inventions have changed how human beings socialize, how they communicate, how they think and act. And we can see this through Neil Postman and also Marshall McLuhan, and when they're discussing the social, moral, and political dangers of technology on humanity. Across the range of media ecology scholarship, there actually is room to bring in natural law and to discuss natural law. And to fully understand the effects of media technologies on humanities, I believe that natural law must be included in the discussion. So today here I'm going to argue that the use of media technology can overshadow adequate attentiveness to natural law by human beings. Like I said, I'm drawing upon C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man to answer the following research question. From the vantage point of natural law, in light of C.S. Lewis's work, what is the ethical impact of media technology on both message and effect? As I was talking about earlier, Abolition of Man actually focuses on two worlds. One is the Green Book, the other is the Tao. The Tao is actually used to utilize the dehumanization of humanity. It is actually natural law. The Green Book is actually, at that time, and I'm not sure if it still is, but it's an English language textbook that was used in England during the time C.S. Lewis's days, and it actually represents emotivism. Lewis discusses human nature as a Platonic division of the three. The head, which actually represents our center of intelligence, the chest or our heart, which represents the center of will, and then the stomach, which actually represents the center of desire. The chest, which is essential for being human, depends on values to function. It includes awareness of moral obligation in our feelings, such as the ability to love and to have relationships. It also gives us the ability to hope and to have faith and to know what is good. So in Lewis's is arguing that if the sentiments of the mind are removed, then man is reduced to not having chests. These men do not possess the operative organs to apprehend objective values and are able to make value judgments based on clear thinking. And this has implications on our emotions. And emotions, as we probably well are known, they come from our heart, while reason stems from our head. If we sever the balance between our head and our heart, we lose. Without the trained emotions, our human beings' intellect is powerless. With losing the ability to reason, man is now a beast. And Aquinas actually goes into this in the Summa about when we lose our lack of ability to reason, we do become a beast. Lewis is concerned with subjectivism, which he argues is taught in the Green Book. Subjectivism is actually the parent of emotivism, positivism, relativism, and it actually can lead to individuals, especially when they're faced with controversy, to choose to take a side that's based on an assumption. And we're probably seeing this in our students today, or in society today either. True. Instead of looking at issues through a sufficiently objective lens, humans make a decision based on their feelings towards the issue. Considering the scope of the concern of media ecologists, one should certainly recognize the media's roles in this conditioning. The assumption actually has its basis and its roots in emotivism. Alistair McIntyre, who we're probably very well known to us, says emotivism is simply the philosophy that ethical judgments are expressions of approval or disapproval of feelings. Emotivism is very problematic to our society because it is not a theory that is based on meaning of moral utterances, but it's actually a theory that's based on how to use moral utterances. The Green Book teaches that such statement has no truth value since they are predominantly expressions of feelings. The media, which is our conduit of information, persuasion, entertainment, can change the media's consumers' attitudes and actions on a certain topic. Moreover, our movies, newspapers, TV, radio, and the internet are very powerful tools that provide Green Book lessons. Through using narrow rhetorical choices of words, pictures, cartoons, and the like, the media can portray not a true representation of what is being portrayed, and we can see that today whenever we're watching the news or even TV programs. The other world is the Tao, which means the way. And this is actually a traditional basis of morality. The Tao is the first principle of practical reason, or the first platitudes. It is natural law, and it is a universal moral law. Its doctrine is objective value, and it includes judgments that are either right or wrong, and it is the revealed truth. Natural law is not primarily an unchanging code that is given to all individuals, but it is also a moral framework that we use to make choices depending on the time and place. McIntyre posits that moral framework is made up of values that are dispositions to not only act in particular ways, but to also feel in particular ways. So that's very important to think about natural law. Lewis believes that natural law is developed through self-criticism or even internal criticism. In modernity, we are seeing that natural law is thought of something to be tolerated, but not really respected. Lewis argues that if natural law is accepted, then all values are accepted. Accepting natural law does have dire consequences. If the moral judgment is rejected, then natural law is rejected. Rejecting natural moral law has very dangerous consequences, because when natural law is abolished, man is abolished. Thus, mankind becomes amoral. And that's where C.S. Lewis is really coming through in chapter 2 and 3 of Abolition of Man. In modernity, individuals, instead of grounding his or her answers in natural ground, or natural law ground, see them as something very basic. And one of those basics are our instincts. And this is very, very problematic. They're not grounded in reason. They're actually, our instincts will compete with each other. So making a decision based on one instinct means that decisions are made at the expense of another instinct. And that's what Lewis is really trying to get at in chapter 3 of Abolition of Man. He argues that natural law, which provides the necessary knowledge of humanity and justice, can be abolished if and when they disagree with a desired end. So you're seeing how probably today, how this is all playing out in our lives. Lewis discusses the final stage when humanity has obtained full control of himself. This is when the human conscience works in a way that man wants it to. This means that man has defeated the conscience of nature, or natural moral law. Instead, natural law guides, which is guiding human ideas, what is good is evil, and acceptable and taboo. It's actually our conditioners. And the media, we could say, are conditioners that are actually telling us what we are supposed to do. They're giving us our motives. And they will manipulate us if we so choose. When all motives of human action have become objects of manipulation, conditioners then will resort to irrational and natural impulses. The rational and natural impulses guide human race. Thus, man's conquest of nature is also nature's conquest of man, or the abolition of man. So in C.S. Lewis's book, he's very interested in Nazism. That's the time he was writing this, was in the 40s. And they're actually, each chapter is a series of a radio talk. And he's very interested in propaganda and how conditioners at that time, being the Nazis, we can look at it today, looking at it in media, and what they're actually telling us who to be, and we're actually in the process of losing who we are. So the desire to enhance human functioning and capabilities lies within the human project of controlling nature through applied science. And that was one very big interest that C.S. Lewis was interested in, was science and scientism. And that's one of the problems that I'm going to discuss now in understanding C.S. Lewis. But now we know where he's coming from. So where is he going? What are the implications to us? And one is actually scientism, but another is the wireless. And I'll start with the wireless. And the wireless for C.S. Lewis was actually the radio at his time. But we can actually look at the wireless now as being the radio, television, internet, all of these things. So what I'm talking about here is going to be including what we think is the wireless. And Lewis actually makes this case in how man is increasing their power over nature through the wireless. He says that objective values are broadcasted to the public through the wireless. And through the wireless, an example to explain what happens when society ceases to believe in objective natural law. A society that believes in natural law works as a whole to have a common good. And we do this through a common dignity towards each other. However, if we don't have a natural law, we are not following it, we will create this power elite, the conditioners, that literally tell us what to think. And it's through propaganda. And that's what Lewis was seeing with the Nazis, is that propaganda was telling the Germans to hate Jews. So Weaver actually, and this is going, Dr. Grabowski's talk yesterday, was kind of getting at the great stereopticon of Weaver. And he is saying that the great gadgets of life, which are the press, the motion picture, and the radio, actually influence the public mind. And this is through persuasion, the use of propaganda. Media technology has the potential to be a conduit of information. It promotes our ideas, and it can lead to consequences on individuals and programming individuals. Through using unethical propaganda, we actually can see, especially the Germans, and how they killed the Jews. They also killed some Catholics and gays as well. Another issue that is of great concern to media ecology is scientism, and I heard a panel earlier today that brought in scientism. So the uninflected use of technology actually aids the emergence of scientism. Postman actually posits that the machine has allowed for scientific facts to be instruments of progress. Progress, by only using objective measures, has the potential to dehumanize people, as you well know. In other words, not allowing human beings to make decisions based on natural moral law reduces human beings to objects, and we're no longer fully human. And so we can see actually through science, and an example comes out of Postman, okay? And it's basically science can tell us when a fetus's heart will begin to beat, and not when it becomes a human. It tells us when it's going to move in the womb, and when it can survive outside the mother's body. It's not natural moral law that actually will tell us that life begins. And to conclude, I really believe that it's actually through the media that man or woman can lose themselves and to only find themselves. Weaver does argue that instead of immersing himself in nature, man will conceptualize order. He can escape to the virtual world, but he cannot escape the virtue world. On the other hand, proper use of media technology by human beings can actually create a good society that uses natural moral law to make societal, cultural, and political decisions, and that's what the Vatican is arguing for. Hence, media technology can either be a blessing or a curse. And I'll end with this very important suggestion that actually comes from Lewis. And the decision on how we use media technology comes down to only two choices. One, either to conform desire to truth or truth to desire, and to conform our soul to reality, or conform reality to our wishes. And as C.S. Lewis writes in The Magician's Nephew, what you see and hear depends a good deal on where you are standing. It also depends on what sort of person you are. So natural moral law does have a lot of impact in the ecology, and I'm seeing it here, and I picked it up in my class through Dr. Trout. And so I guess that's my paper, but thank you.
And our final speaker is Eugene Marlowe from the City University of New York, and it's titled Zikkaron Krystallnacht, Remembrance of Krystallnacht, A Family Story.